Good evening.
Thank you so much for coming out in this rain. It's a warm summer rain, but still rain, to celebrate Cleyvis Natera and her newest book, The Grand And she's in conversation this evening with Maisy Card, who's the author of These Goats Are Family. So I'm going to I'd like to introduce them both. So Cleyvis Natera is the author of Neruda on the Park. And she was born in the Dominican Republic, migrated to the United States at 10 years old, and grew up in New York City. She holds a BA from Skidmore College and MFA from New York University. And her writing has won awards and fellowships from the International Latino Book Awards, PEN America, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the Kenyan Reviews Writers Workshops, the Vermont Studio Center, the Hermitage Artists Retreat, Roland Writers Retreat, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. And she's currently a Fulbright specialist, and she lives with her husband and 2 young children in Montclair, New Jersey. And the Grand Paloma Resort is her second novel, and
my third novel's coming, I saw
And Maisy Card is the author of the novel These Goats Are Family, which won an American Book Award and was a finalist for the PEN Hemingway Award for Debut Novel, the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, and the LA Times Art Seidenbaum Award for the first fiction. And her writing has appeared in the Paris Review Daily, AGNI, and the New York Times, Guernica, and other publications. And she is a librarian, a branch manager of Jersey City Library.
Thank you so much, Margot. And thank you to the entire watchung booksellers team. I launched my first book here 3 years ago, and so it's really special to be back. And I just want to thank you all for coming in this terrible weather. Hello, you can take a seat, don't be shy. Unless you stumble here to get out of the rain. You want nothing to do with us. But it feels really good to be here. I love Montclair. I just love all of you, and my book club is here, my writer friends are here, and my Northeast Buzz Aldrin / people are here, and of course my family is here, and it feels just really special to be here to celebrate this book. So thank you, Maisy, for agreeing to.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this book, but we're going to start with a short reading.
So I'm just going to read for a little bit. I'm not going to read for too long. So the book opens with a letter that is from the hotel to the guests. And, I think the main thing, I'm not going to read that part, but I just want you to know that the main takeaway from that letter is that this is the safest place in the Dominican Republic. Like, there's never been a single violent act or accident. So guess what's about to happen? I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning. The tourist child's Are you ready? The tourist child's, that's my uncle. The tourist child's mud-streaked body had become heavy, and sweat made her slippery in Elena's arms. As she made her way out from the tropical forest behind the Grand Paloma Resort, Elena headed not in the direction of the manicure grounds, but into the water-starved, cracked dirt of the staff quarters. Looking down at the little girl's unconscious form, she whispered, "Please, please, please don't die on me." She walked through row after row of beautiful casitas, alternating between vibrant turquoise and the brightest yellow, with a flash of hot pink every fourth or fifth little house, each decorated with flower beds full of birds of paradise and lilac hibiscus bushes. It was the kind of sight that would make a visitor sigh in delight, unless they happened to touch the plants and realize they were plastic. Nothing got water on this side of the resort. Once she was safely inside the casita she shared with her older sister, Laura, Elena took a breath and looked around, unsure whether to lay the child on her bed or her sister's bed. Relief washed over her. No one had seen her. It was as if the dusty ground of the forest had lifted and shrouded her. She was paralyzed momentarily by the weight of the child's body. What was she, 60 pounds, 200? Elena was dizzy from the heat and humidity. She'd been hired to care for the now injured and unconscious child, looking after the girl by day and sleeping in a tiny, cut-sized room in the back of the kitchen of the penthouse suite that the girl and her parents occupied. She hadn't been in the casita all week. Elena's side was as messy as she left it. Unmade bed, strewn clothes, shoes everywhere. It was shocking. Her sister always cleaned up after her. Elena laid the kid on Laura's neatly made bed. She called the girl's name and shook her gently. No response. The blonde, bouncy curls that had swayed when they tried the latest viral TikTok dance that morning before their outing into the forest were matted with mud and blood. The kid's flat chest seemed too still. Had it been a mistake moving this girl? I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Cleyvis. As I was saying to you before, I really love this novel. Just from a plot standpoint, and also from a craft standpoint, and also I feel like it had a lot of heart. So I noticed there were a lot of thematic similarities between this and Neruda in the Park, specifically the overlap about community. So I wondered if you could talk about that a little. Like in both books, you have these characters whose personal ambition is kind of in conflict with community survival. And part of the main plot deals with them betraying that community in some way. So why do you think you keep coming back to that theme, and why did you kind of focus on it in this book?
Okay, we're gonna start with a hard question. no easy ways. I think, I really am pretty obsessed with this idea of like the individual and how we can function in society, and especially when you think about labor and work and the way that a lot of times I think, capitalistic society, what we're living through, just asks us to be very selfish and very self-centered, and to succeed often means, right? Like less time with your family, more time at work. And so, one of the things that I was really, that really attracted me to writing this book about this resort is because, when I left the Dominican Republic, I was 10 years old. And I did not have a lot of money. I mean, I grew up with very little money. The house that I lived in before my mother came to the United States to work, we didn't have running water. There was like a latrine in the back. When my mother left, very quickly we moved into this huge, it was huge to me, but it was like I had a room with my sister and my, we had a lot of space in this new house, and we had a bathroom inside the house that flushed, and once we immigrated to the United States, right, and my life kind of took a different divergent point. I went to college, I went to graduate school, I started working in corporate America, and I spent the better part of 2 decades working in corporate America. I know you're shocked, I'm so young looking. But once I started working and I kept getting promoted, and I started traveling, and one of the things that I realized as I kept traveling, first for pleasure, in my 20s, but you were kind of roughing it in hostels and stuff. But for work, they were putting me up in suites, and you get upgraded all the time when you're a business traveler. And so I had this experience, of being in spaces where people just wouldn't assume that I was a guest. Very often, even in Europe, even in Latin America, even in the Far East, people would just assume that I was service. And so, what ended up happening to me is that I realized that being in this kind of inside-outside, right? Culturally, right? I'm inside-outside because I'm an immigrant in this country. But also there's this inside-outside of class mobility. And I just think that like the kind of things people would say around me, like other tourists about the workers, I thought, like, my goodness, you know? And I also just started talking to workers and started talking to them about their work and the things they were doing. And it just made me realize that I think our resort is just like the perfect place to like set up like this tension between the individual and their community. Because, you know, like Laura, the protagonist of this book, has worked really hard to like make it to like middle management. And she's like the highest ranked person that's a local. And, you know, it's kind of wild because like other people think she's been treated unfairly, like she should have a higher title, but she's like, are you crazy? I'm like the highest ranked, like people kiss my feet here, you know, because I'm so highly ranked. And so, you know, she has just drank the corporate Kool-Aid. Like she just believes everything this corporation tells her about like mobility. And so, you know, she to me seemed like a really wonderful vessel to kind of explore this conflict between the individual and your community, especially because she's had to take care of her younger sister, Elena. They're 10 years apart, and Laura had to take a motherhood role with Elena when she was 14 years old because their mother passed away. And you learn all of this in the first chapter, so we're not spoiling. But you know, like one of the things that I wanted to play around with these two women was like this idea that you could have these two sisters, and that, you know, if their number one desire was to get off the resort, right? Like one of them is trying to do everything she can to get them out of the resort. And then the other one, the younger one, just keeps messing up. And I just think that is really like taught and fraught to think about how the individual comes into conflict and how sometimes the things we're asked to do for our community are gonna be in direct conflict with like what our work asks us to do, and like what choice do you make and what are the repercussions of those choices.
I didn't want to open with the White Lotus question, but yeah, I have read reviews where they mention the White Lotus, but I know I'm a writer. I know how ideas work, and I probably guessed that you thought of this before that show came out. But I'm wondering if you could talk about like the relationship between the book and the show, and kind of if it's like kind of success affected the writing at all.
It's success. Oh, that's a good question. See, people haven't, thank you, Maisy. Because people keep being like, what do you think about White Lotus? Did you riff off of it? You know, I think it's, first of all, I love the show. I know there's like mixed reviews out there, but I actually love it. I started writing this book during the pandemic. So I think it's really important to like situate, like you're saying, like myself. I started writing the book in 2020 during the pandemic, and one of the biggest drivers for me writing the book was that we were on lockdown. And the minute they said we couldn't get on planes and we couldn't leave our homes, I immediately got homesick. Like I just started thinking about this place where I was born, and it's so beautiful. And I kept thinking about like, what if I never see it again? Like what if I never get to go there? And I just had this longing for that place. And so, you know, it's so interesting because I had been thinking about the employees in the resort for a long time. I mean, I think that's something that people don't realize, that most writers get ideas for books and you just keep marinating about these random people that you made up in your head. And then you go through life and something will happen and you'll be like, that's so funny, that's what she would think about that. And then you're like, oh my God, I hope no one heard me because I'll be institutionalized. So I had been living with these characters for a long time, and you know, but I was working on it on the park. It had been such a long journey to get that book out, and I finally was close. You know, my agent and I felt like we were ready to take it to market, and when the pandemic happened, like there was no doing anything in publishing because like most places it shut down. And so I was in like this in-between space where I felt like this desperation, even though there was a global catastrophe. I kept thinking like, please let the world go on so my first book can get published and I can sell it. And then there was this other side of me which was like petrified about like the state of the world and the horrors that were happening to us. So, you know, I think part of the reason why the book is so fast-paced is because I really was thinking about escape. And like all of these characters want to escape except for like one person who actually wants to be where they are. And so I really was like in that mindset. And, you know, so anyway, so later on in 2020, my agent decides to take the book out to market, and fortunately for us, we sold it like within 2 weeks. And so it was wonderful, but then I got really caught up with like the process, the editorial process for that book. And so it was really interesting because, you know, anytime that I would have a lull, I would like go and write one of these stories, and I would be like, how messy can I make these people? Like, how terrible can I make them? I just wanted the, you know, and there were short stories that I was writing. So like, I just wanted each story to build on the last one, and to be like, one mistake leads to another mistake, leads to another mistake. And so, you know, I kept writing them. I wrote maybe like 100 pages worth of stories. And then by 2022, when the book came out, you know, I just went back to like another book that I had been working on. For my MFA, I had a thesis that I had never sold. And I really wanted that book to be my second book. So I just put like my resort stories to the side and started revising that book. So in 2022, you know, The White Lotus comes out. And I was like devastated. Because I was like, are you freaking kidding me? You know, and of course this happens to all of us, because of course all the time people like dream up your same ideas and you're devastated because you think this will never happen. So, you know, I was in Texas at a writing conference and talking to one of my writing friends, and I was and another editor, and I was telling them about, you know, the book that I worked on in my MFA. And they're all like, that's interesting, but like they didn't seem very interested, which was very hurtful. and then of course we start talking about The White Lotus, and then I say, I cannot believe this is happening to me, because I have like, you know, 100 pages of this book, and I put it to the side, and I'm so annoyed. And the editor, who's not my editor, was like, have you lost your mind? This is actually good, you know? And so I called my agent like the next day from this place, and I was like, I know you're reading this other book, but I actually have this other book that I've been working on, and I just wonder what you think. And he was like, are you crazy? Send it to me right now. You know? And so, you know, like, so he read it, and he had notes for me. So, and you know, we had that conversation about the fact that short stories don't sell as well, and like, would I consider making it into a novel? And I was like, you know, I don't think so. I think I'm gonna stick with short stories. And so like 6 months later, I'm like meeting with my actual editor, and she's like, you know, and this is now 2023, and she's like, do you have any fiction? Because I haven't bought any books that are fiction. I bought all these memoirs. And I was like, yeah, I have 2 books that are fiction, you know, that I could sell you, but neither one is ready. And she was like, okay, tell me about them. So I tell her, of course, I lead with my MFA baby, and I'm like, this book is so beautiful. And she's like, oh yeah, that sounds really good. And she's like, what's the second one? And I was like, these are boys, they're just doing all these terrible things, and it's messy. And she was like, give me that one. I want to read it. And so, you know, we put together, the book wasn't finished, obviously, it was just short stories. And she actually said she might be willing to buy it, but it would be a really uphill battle with like the sales team and the marketing team. Short stories don't do as well. And then, you know, we started talking about like the finances of it. And, you know, she couldn't really talk in a lot of terms, like openly, because, you know, the fact is that she didn't know what it was, and she didn't know what would happen. But it was pretty stark to me, the financial difference between selling a collection of short stories and a novel. And then I just really started thinking about what I wanted to do with this book, and the fact that it was this kind of like multiphonic narrative anyway, and the novel has changed so much over the last year, you know, decades, I would say, where like you can have different perspectives and characters. So it was just really interesting to me, Maisy, because at the end of the day, I was like, first of all, I couldn't believe that like I put together an outline, and then we revised like 50 pages of the book that I had, and like she bought it within a week. Like it was just like this. And you know, for me, after like, the first journey for me of like publication was 15 years. So the idea that for my second book, I was able to sell a book that wasn't finished, that, you know, for me, it just kind of blew my mind. Like this book still feels like a miracle that it's in the world, you know? And so now when people ask me about White Lotus, I think it's really interesting because there's no way to correct it, right? Like my book came out in 2025, and like White Lotus came out in 2022. So of course, when I tell people, like, I swear I started working on it 5 years ago, they're all like, yeah, sure, okay. But you know, I don't have an issue with the people making that connection. And I think, you know, I do think that what I'm doing is really different than like what the show is doing. I mean, I think fundamentally I am concerned with the staff of this resort as the protagonist. And like, I'm concerned with their growth and their changes and their obsessions and their difficulties outside of like what's happening to the tourists. And I think that's like very different than like the hotel fiction that I have read, where like even people that are writing from our region of the Caribbean, very often like the story revolves around the tourists, you know? And so I think that's like a radical difference, and I'm proud of this book. And I think it is really different, but it's just interesting that I read talks about that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew you were writing this during the pandemic because I was writing a book. I was trying to write a book that was like a mystery, a thriller that also focused on like Black women's labor. And in the end, like the structure kind of fell apart. But you know, so one thing I really noticed and admired about this book is that it really does do a kind of in-depth class analysis, and it allows us time to get to know all the characters, but at the same time, you don't compromise pacing. So it was like a page turner, a quick read all the way through. And I'm just wondering how you kind of found the structure, because it's also like a playful structure too, because you have like, Cleyvis does this thing where there's like a chorus of workers that kind of repeats and comes in periodically. You know, so how did you find that structure?
Yeah, I mean, when I started writing them as stories, like I was pretty dead set on this being a 7-day book. Who's that? 7-day. It was gonna be a 7-day book, and when I first saw that as an outline, my editor was like, "That's not long enough. You need to that's not long enough for anything of consequence to happen to a person." And I was like, "I don't believe it. Challenge accepted," you know. So like for me, the first thing was that I knew the book was gonna move, where the present action was a day by day. Right? And then the other constraint that I gave myself is that I didn't want flashbacks. You know, like I did not want any history, like, you know, history plays a big role in the kind of lore of the town, but it had to come through the characters. Like I wasn't gonna do any flashbacks to the 1800s or whatever, you know? And so I think that because, you know, part of the reason why it took me over a decade to sell my first book is because I didn't know how to write plot. And I didn't know how to like do narrative tension. And there was something that happened to me with Neruda on the Park, where like once I figured out, like, oh, this is how you build tension. This is how you make people keep turning a page. I like that unlocked for me for my thesis why that book had failed. And then when I came into this one, you know, Neruda on the Park, like part of like that conceit was that it was really tension between like a new generation and an old generation. It's like tension between like this idea of like we grow through rest, and like my protagonist like going through this sensual journey, right? And like her mom is like, no gentrification, you know? And so there's like all these moments where like the book required rest, because that was like part of the concept of the book, right? And for this one, I was like, well, if this book really is about work and labor, then I also want to make it so that the reader whose labor is reading can't stop reading, because the workers can't stop working. And so, you know, so I overwrote a lot. So I think that's the other thing that I did with this book, that I was like, you know what, I need to overwrite it, because I needed to know everything that happened to all of the central characters for the 7 days. And then like, you know, it was like brutal. I like deleted 100 pages out of one character. I deleted like 60 pages out of another one, because it was like, you know, actually the story is about a community. So like you never miss sight that there's like these two protagonists. And so everything kind of comes back to Elena and Laura, but you know, the story keeps moving and there's critical parts that other people have to carry. So, you know, I think it was really challenging for me, the structure of this book and the constraints that I had to like give up on like not having flashbacks. Like my editor was like, we need some flashbacks. And I was like, fine. So, you know, there are like 2 moments in the novel where like we go into like, I put a year earlier, you know, I was like, I can't go further than a year. So, you know, I had to give up, you know, or give in, I should say, into some of that for the book to work. And I think it is, it's like a beautiful, both moments are really important for like the character. So I don't regret it. But I do feel like worried about how people are gonna react to like the tension, because it is like very tense. Like these people are doing a lot of questionable things, and even though you understand why they're doing it, I just worry that like I didn't build in enough rest for the reader. So I wonder now, like whether or not.
But that works to your advantage, because it's definitely like a page turner, and that's what people want to read.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's a perfect summer book too, but at the same time, it does have, I think it does have this very like deep class analysis, and it really shows it's not just the workers. Kind of you think of them as the oppressed group, but then you also explore, how they, the political climate of Haiti, and also the internalized racism in the DR against Haitians in themselves. Kind of changes the lives of the workers too. I think you really do a good job of interjecting that. And then you have, I guess I wanted to talk about also the community that you do choose to set it in, and kind of like what influenced that. Pico Diablo.
Yeah. So when I was really young, when I was 20, I read Edwidge Danticat's The Farming of Bones, and it really kind of changed like my perspective of my country in this really deep way, because like I had never heard of the Parsley Massacre, which happened in 1937, and like tens of thousands of Haitians were massacred at the command of the government. And even though I have family members who, my grandparents were old enough that they had lived through it, I went to school until like halfway through 5th grade. I had never learned about that part of history. And also no one ever talks about it in the Dominican Republic. I mean, things have changed now, and there's monuments and there's like more of an awareness, but it became really clear to me how important literature was in like helping to unearth like the parts of history that there's like a vested interest in like hiding and erasing it. And so after I read the Farming of Bones, every time I went back to the Dominican Republic, I would look at the country like through the lens of Amabel, who's like that protagonist. And I would be like, what would Amabel think about this? Like what would she make of, what's happening? And the situation has progressively gotten worse. Like there's a humanitarian crisis going on now in Haiti. The government was toppled. And so what has happened now is that like the Dominican, there's always been a lot of tension and a lot of like racism, but now it's really stark. I mean, in the last 10 years, like birthright citizenship was taken away. It's so hard for Dominicans of like Haitian descent to maintain their citizenship. It's just really difficult. And so, for me, I was just really thinking about a lot of that as I went back and forth. And so like when I was in my 20s, I stumbled on this history, which is that, in the 1800s, there was a ship that left from Philadelphia, and it had like 2,500 enslaved people and newly freed people. And at the time, the Dominican Republic was occupied by Haiti. And so the president of the island had extended this invitation to these enslaved and freed people and paid for their passage to come to the Dominican Republic. And 2,500 of them stayed. I went to Samaná, where most of these people ended up making their lives. And like there was no record of it. Like I found out about it through a New York Times article. And when I went back there, like I went to the tourists and I was like, where can I go see where these people lived? Where's the museum? And they were like, what? No, we don't know what you're talking about. You need to go to the Capitol. And I thought that was fascinating, So when I was in my 20s, I applied for a Fulbright where I was gonna study that and like just, write a book on that. I ended up making it as an alternate, but I never got picked. And then I met Kevin, and I didn't reapply. But like that story stayed in my head. Like all these years, I kept thinking about it. I kept being like, this is so fun. Like, how can I do it? Because I don't want to write a historical novel. It's just not, in my 20s I did, but now I don't. And so I just kept thinking, like, how can I write this history into this book that is really concerned with people not facing their past, and like a country that like has a very difficult time facing its own history. And so, so the resort, they, magnify this history, and they have like a Diablo Rum flight that you can take to experience like the flight from the, from this ship that these people took. And you can see the way that like a resort would really maximize this kind of lore of the town. And again, like the town itself, Pico Diablo, the people that live there are descended from the freed slave and the enslaved people, the freed men and the previously enslaved people. And so it was just really interesting to me to like create a community of people who felt completely outside of Dominican culture and Haitian culture. And they also feel like, these people are messy. We don't want anything to do with their conflict. That doesn't have anything to do with us. We're like Americans, So they have this mentality in the town, which makes them feel like they are in this country, but they're not of this country. And whatever messiness is happening, they don't need to like pick a side. And I just thought that for me, it was important to try to like imbue into this story just the horror that's happening in this country, but to do it in a way where, again, like I think it is really about these two characters. So I think like whatever the history is doing for the country, whatever the history is doing for this town, it needed to only come through these people. Like, I thought it was very important that like if we got extra information, then it would be through the resort. Like there's no way in which the history is interjected in like a way that would feel, like it's coming from the past.
Yeah, even though I've read Farming of the Bones and also the book Massacre River, I'm forgetting the author's name right now, but it still was like chilling when I got to that moment when you were kind of describing, the expulsion of Haitians and like the denaturalization, the end of birthright citizenship, and it just kind of, because of the present moment, it reminds you that there's this kind of like blueprint for fascism that just keeps happening over and over. But before we turn to audience questions, I want to just ask you if you could say a little bit about your third book, which you just sold.
Hey! I mean, again, like for anyone in the audience that's working on something that's been really hard, I just want to tell you that it's possible to like be on the other side of like despair and failure and loss. Because my goodness, I cried so much over my first two books, really, because the first one never even made it out of the computer. And so it's just really wild to me that, I was having lunch with my editor, and this is a different editor now, because my editor that acquired my first two books got promoted and left my imprint. So I've been working with another person there in the publisher of the imprint, and we were having lunch, and she was like, we were talking about this book. She's very excited about the book. I'm excited about this book, and she was like, so do you have another book? And I was like, I do. This time I was like not going to like waste any time. So when I started thinking about this as short stories, I actually thought about it as a series. And I was like, I'm gonna write 5 books, and it's gonna be like, each is gonna be like in the Caribbean, and they're gonna be a series, but the characters are not gonna repeat. And so I was like, I need to find a way. So I've been thinking about like all the people in all the resorts, right? Like anytime I have downtime, I'm like, what's happening in Curacao? Like what's happening in Aruba, And so when the editor asked me, I was like, I actually do. Like I have an outline. I mean, my editor and my agent and I were talking about it. It's just, I think one of the things that I'm really grateful for my corporate background and like my licenses in project management and like bringing that side of myself into my artist self is that I think like as artists, we're always like, we're waiting for the muse and when, and like the thing to me is that I really have realized that we need to be more business minded. So you know what, like I still will get my MFA thesis published. I swear it. But you know what's happening right now, what's hot right now is is this, you know? And I figured out a way to do it. I mean, I had to work so hard over the last 5 years to pull off this book. It was a really hard book to write, but I feel really proud that I've developed like a different skill set as a writer. And I'm like, why would I try to sell something that like wouldn't sell? Like, why would I be, you know, so ego tripping that I would be like, buy this book, it's beautiful and poetic, and it really doesn't move anywhere. It's not about plot, you know? So I was just really excited that she was excited about the idea when I told her. And I mean, it's just like really concerned with class, and it's really concerned with like gender, and it's concerned with like, you know, his two best friends who are at this resort. And there's all kinds of mayhem. So, you know, I started writing it, and, you know, I have to stop now because I'm like marketing this book, but it's gonna be good. And I'm excited, and it's also gonna be really crazy because it's due next year. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you see me around town looking haggard, please forgive me. Because I've probably been working on the book. But I don't know, I just feel really excited. I'm thinking about them all the time, you know, and I'm excited to keep writing into this world and see what I find and what I discover.
Thank you so much for that. Now we're gonna have time for audience questions. Yep.
Hello.
Hi.
I am also Dominican. So
Hey, Dominican people!
the pura cepa. I also came to the U.S. when I was 11, so around the same time. And I've been actually being very cognizant about the kind of books that I'm reading. So I've been reading and intentionally reading a lot of Dominican books. What I have noticed is that I don't know if it's something inherently Dominican or it's just what we like to read or write. But a lot of the books that I've read by Dominican authors are with characters that are very messy or very raw.
Very wrong?
Raw.
Or wrong?
Right. So it's like people that are making really tough decisions that I don't agree with, but I still want to know why they're doing this. So I'm thinking Loca by Alejandro Heredia.
Oh, I love that book.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I am thinking, you know, Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. Just like books that I just want to scream at the characters. And I'm wondering what you think it's happening in the ether. Is it all Dominican authors that just love to write this messy stories, or it's because of our culture?
Yes and yes. No, but I think it's really interesting that you're bringing this up because I read all those books and I mean, I didn't really think about them as like super messy. I mean, I think that there's something cultural about the way that we live, where like our families are so intertwined in our identities. And I think that, like, you know, when I think about the great American novels that I read when I was in college and graduate school, so much about it is like the solitary journey of an individual toward like self-actualization, you know? And like the truth is that like, we don't care about that, you know? Like so much of what and it's like, it is happening, but I think what's happening to us is happening through community. It's happening through our families. Like the way that we get pushed back on who we want to be is like the expectations and the obligations of our families, and the culture itself or the religion. So I don't know. I think that I know, I don't know Alejandro very well. I had him come to Montclair State for an event that we had at Montclair State University where I teach. And he was fantastic, you know? And I think Elizabeth Acevedo is one of my favorites. She blurbed this book. She's incredibly generous. But yeah, like I think there's something in the water, right? There's something in the air where like, I think what we're trying, and I do think that is beautiful. Like with this book, like there were assumptions I made about my ideal reader would be someone that has read Dominicana, that has read Let It Rain Coffee, that has read in the Time of the Butterflies, that has read Farming of Bones. Like I came into this book being like, I don't have to give a lot of background because you're gonna have it. And you know, for some people that may not have it, that's okay. I think you'll still enjoy it, but there is gonna be like a layer of the book that you might just not have access to because the book is assuming that you have a certain sophistication about the kind of culture that we're talking about and the themes and the issues that we tackle. So I think you should. Are you right?
No, I'm not.
You should be. Like even seeing that, I think is brilliant, and I think it's really just wonderful that you picked up on that. I would also recommend if you want to read something really different. Erika Morillo is the translator of this book in Spanish, and she wrote a book called Mother Archive. And if you want to read that book, I mean, it's also messy, but it's messy. It's like photography, and it's like these anecdotes. It's a memoir, and it's just beautifully written. But I think what's happening in her book is really different than like what's happening in fiction. Yeah, and I think that would be a book I would recommend that I think is doing something different with like Dominican culture.
Yeah.
I am curious. I have congratulations on all the good things because I followed your career. But you have mentioned that it took you 15 years to bring Neruda on the Park to the world, right? And there's a short window with Paloma Resort. I'm curious as to how you have seen yourself change as the writer on the desk, because you lived with Neruda on the Park for a long time, and you kind of alluded in the conversation as to like the things that you were figuring out. But here you had a shorter window. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I can call Dali my therapist. Tell the people. I think it's been really interesting for me because I think I think with Neruda in the Park there was so much failure and rejection that I spent a lot of time beating myself up and feeling really frustrated with the work. And it wasn't really until I thought that I might not publish it that I felt really free to like do what I wanted to do with the book in a way that I think actually made the book a lot better. So, I mean, I think the way that I have changed as a writer is that I'm willing to take bigger risks. And I think, what I think as ambition as a writer has changed a lot too. Like there was a time when like what I care most about were like, I came up through like literary fiction, and it's the Pulitzer and the National Book Award and the MacArthur and like all these accolades that are so important, to like be considered serious. And I think like a big thing that has changed for me is that I'm a lot more concerned with like how can I use literature to like deal with social issues. Like how can I write a book that's truly delicious and like page turning and wonderful, but that like has this profundity in it, this depth in it. And and I think like to me, like even this one being like, I want to learn how to write. Like I didn't even really know people were gonna call it a thriller. I was just like, oh, it's like literary suspense. Like it's just like suspenseful, and it's like still really about characters. But I really feel like I'm just not as caught up in like whether people are gonna take me seriously, whether my career is going to be validated as someone who's doing something of worth. Because I think like I'm still getting letters from Neruda on the Park from people that read it and that are so moved, or that they were able to understand something about their parents or like their relationship with a friend. And so, I feel like that's probably the way in which I have changed the most as a writer, is that I feel like I want to do what I want to do, and I want to do it in an excellent way. And if that means that like my peers are not going to acknowledge what I do as art or see it as like highbrow, like I'm willing to take that risk. Like I'm willing to forego some of the things that really I was very, very focused on when I was a younger person, just to write good books, and to like get to be in front of people who love books. To me, like that's become more valuable than like the other things.
Anyone over here? No.
This is the side that's active. They're like that.
Well, that's family, right?
Hi, so congratulations on all of your success. I'm super excited for the next book already, sorry. I guess my question for you is, as a writer, like it's been a long journey, and it's gonna be a lifelong journey, but like, what would you say is something that you wanna achieve that will make you feel like, this is like my biggest goal or my biggest desire? Where do you want to go in terms of your writing?
I mean, I think, thank you. We're like Instagram friends. I'm so glad to see you all time. I think, thank you for that question. I mean, it's hard to like, I know it's gonna sound really cheesy, but I feel like I am living my goal. Like I just, like I have my family, my kids are healthy, like that's like what's important to me. Like, I get to travel a lot, and I feel like that's one of the things that, there were like a couple of things that I thought when I published Neruda on the Park. I said to myself, what will success be? Because I know I'm gonna be devastated when I don't get a Pulitzer, like in the first month that it comes out, even though you have to wait a whole year. I was like, if these people don't hand me the Nobel Prize for literature, I will actually feel about myself. And like I remember just thinking then, like, and it is because I'm a planner, right? That I was like, just set up and what can you control? So like for me, my goals were that I can write another book after that book, that I can travel through my writing, that I don't have to compromise our lifestyle, because I gave up, a really good paying job to become a writer. So, like things like that to me matter. And so, like I do make compromises, right? Because I could have, there's a way that I think I could have sold this book as a collection of short stories and been true to a different artistic integrity. But like, I care about money, like I have a family. And if I can write that same book just slightly altered and make more money, like I'd rather do that. And so I think like there are certain things about me being an immigrant that I can't like ignore about like reality of life. But yeah, I don't know, I have to tell you, like I honestly, when I sold the book, the third book, and it just was a lot quicker. And I just was like, I wish I could tell like, younger me, like don't be so hard on yourself, don't like cry so much, like don't beat yourself up so much, because there's a way in which like things progressively get easier if you're like learning and pushing yourself, and listen, I'm not naive. Like there are plenty of writers in this audience that know that like a career goes up and down. Like I'm not assuming that selling the fourth book is gonna be as easy. Like I know there's a lot more pressure. Like I have to sell books, right? Like that was a pressure that I didn't feel as much with my debut, because I was like, who knows? And now I'm like, if I want to keep if I want to keep writing books, I have to sell books. Which I think is really different than like when I was in my MFA 25 years ago. People could like make a career off of one book that sold 2,000 copies, like people really could. And I don't think that's within reach as much anymore. So yeah, like I feel really fortunate right now. There's very little I would change about my life. There aren't these big, if anybody here is in the Nobel Prize committee, I'll take it. But I just, I don't get caught up with that. Like, like I wrote an article for Modern Love and it came out, and like that to me felt like a dream, because I read Modern Love and I watch it and I love it. And like having a Modern Love essay for me is like, okay, somebody pinch me, and that to me, and I never had the goal because I thought it was impossible. Like I was like, oh my God, I know so many people who have written incredible essays and haven't gotten in, that I didn't think it would be possible. So I think there's still like these moments of like joy and delight that come with like just working hard and taking risks. But there really isn't anything that I'm like chasing.
From the family, okay? All right. Okay, Cleyvis, you mentioned how your books, you have history in them, you've embedded history in them. And you also mentioned that you may do series.
Yeah.
The third book, and if you do series, will you also be implementing history in it? Because I think that's very important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so like part of the reason I picked Curaçao is because good question. Her fiance was like, nice job, babe. Uncle Darren's like, you did it, babe. Thank you for that question, Sheila. I think, so like part of the reason why I picked Curaçao is because I think Curaçao is a really interesting island. And like, I think most people aren't as interested in the Caribbean as I am. Like, I think it's really interesting that the Caribbean has like Spanish-speaking people, English-speaking people, French-speaking people that are like, the colonization that happened created really different societies. And the way those societies move are so different, and the way they function. And capitalism in Curaçao is really different. I'm not giving it away because you gotta buy the book. But there's just like a lot of really interesting things that happen in that island that like have to do with like commerce and banking. And so, I'm gonna have to just learn a lot in the next year, because the other thing that's really interesting, and I'll do it in like 2 minutes. Okay. So when I was growing up, if somebody said that a woman was going to Curaçao, it usually meant sex trade. Children, close your ears. So, you know, whenever someone would say they were going to Curaçao for work, everybody would be like, so, you know, the protagonist for this third book is like in the running for CEO. Like she's like, in 1 week, she's gonna find out if she's CEO. And so I just thought it would be really interesting to put a woman who's really had a very different upbringing in life in an island where she gets mistaken for a person, like a service person. It's not gonna be a maid. You know, and the kind of tension that brings to someone who's lived like a more sheltered life. Or like a more privileged life, you know? So I don't know, there's like something to me about this island, and I haven't been there, so I told Kevin, he's gonna finance some trips. Like, guess where we're going for spring break? If any of our mommy families, our Buzz Aldrin families wanna come along. But yeah, I don't know, like I think there's something really exciting about just like, you know, I do think the Caribbean is the most beautiful place in the whole world, like as a region, and I think the Dominican Republic is the best one. But you know, maybe I'll be challenged when I go to Curaçao, and I'll be like, Curaçao is a close second. But I'm really excited. I think that there's just like, historically speaking, I think Curaçao is one of the most fascinating islands, and that's why I'm going there next. And so there's like this sense I have about discovery and like how but I don't know yet. Like with this book, I knew that I wanted to like embed history, but I didn't know how. And it was later in the process that I realized like, oh, this is the way I'm gonna do it. So that it doesn't have to be like heavy. And so, you know, hopefully I'll find a way to go to the third book. But thank you for that question.
One last question, or, yeah?
So I love the bits of history that are given through fiction books, but do you see yourself possibly going outside of fiction, outside of that genre, and doing something more as you continue to explore and learn more about these areas? Would you limit yourself? Do you feel like you're strictly fictional, or?
No, I mean, not at all. I think one of the things that really helped me when I came back after everything that happened with my children and like brought me back to writing after a long absence is that I really felt like this abundance of language, and I started writing essays. So like I have an essay that was just published in Zuleika Jawat's Book of Alchemy, and I write essays all the time. So I started working on a memoir, actually, and I published one part of it as autofiction, and like the blowback from my family was so severe. Like I lost, aunt stopped talking to me, I got kind of blacklisted for a while, and this was fiction, people. I mean, and it really wasn't even dealing with a lot of the issues that I would get to, and so, you know, I started thinking a lot about that. Like, do we take the hard path in life, or do you take the easier path in life? And so, some people gotta die before. I know that sounds crazy, but I really do feel like I gotta wait for some of like my older, you know, because I love them and I don't want people to get hurt. And the point is not to like air out the ugly things that have happened in our family, but I also think it's really important. Like everything that I'm talking about in my books about violence and about class, there are things that like I first learned to become concerned with because of my family. And so, you know, like I have a memoir that I have it, you know, and I have an outline for it. So interesting because the editor asked me if I wanted to like have a multiple book deal, like do you want to like do something else? And my agent doesn't believe in that. He's like, we're one at a time, because anything can happen, and like your whole, like the worth of your books can change book to book. But I thought it was so interesting because momentarily I was like, will I be brave? Like, will I just pitch this memoir and like do it, you know? And then I was like, stop it. Let's go to the Caribbean, let's have some palomas, you know? And like, let's take 10 years or 15 years, and then, you know, maybe I'll do it. Thank you for that question.
Thank you both so much.